everyone, and how you doing today? We're gonna do another manga review, this time reviewing Tokyo Revengers. I'm sure a lot of people may have seen this because the new anime has come out, and so far the anime's been pretty solid, I gotta say. So I was first introduced to this through the anime. I picked up the manga series, and now I am fully up to date. So I figured that I would give you my thoughts on Tokyo Revengers, if it's good, if it's worth getting into, the highlights of it, of course. So let's get into the story. So our main character is Takemichi. He's an adult, and he heard on the news that morning that his only girlfriend ever had recently died due to this incident caused by a gang. And at that moment, he's reflecting on his life. You know, life could be better. And in this moment, he's thrown in front of a train. Uh-oh. And just when he thinks he's going to die, he finds himself thrown back in time to when he was in middle school. Now, you've probably read a few time leap mangas before. This one has a difference of 12 years, which is pretty steep. I find it interesting, constantly, that they chose middle school instead of high school, as is the classic anime thing to always have everything take place in high school. But also, it does make the romance kind of weird if he's an adult who's in a 13-year-old's body hitting on another 13-year-old. I mean, I guess you could argue that it's not that weird. I'll let you decide that one. But yeah, as you can see, he had his hair much different when he was a kid, which I appreciate the attention to detail there, because, you know, as we grow up, we change our hairstyles constantly. And when he was a kid, he was a bit of a delinquent. Now, going back to this time reminds him of just how bad his life was, even as a middle schooler, because he's not necessarily a strong, tough character, despite the fact of choosing this lifestyle. So he very easily loses all fights that he's in, and it's not like a cool type of losing either. And I think that's probably what makes him a relatable character right off the bat, is the fact that when he loses, it like feels bad. It feels embarrassing, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that feeling. But then he's reminded that he has a girlfriend at this time, which is probably like the only good thing about this time of his life. So he rushes to go see her because he wants to see her again, you know, in the future she's dead. And as soon as he sees her, he just starts bawling his eyes out because it occurs to him at this moment, oh yeah, I was in love with her. I think it's this moment where you're like, all right, I'm in. Because now you know that he's gonna try to save her so that the future turns out different. So soon after, he meets up with her brother, and he basically just spills the beans that he's a time traveler. And he warns him that, hey, in the future, on this date, you and your sister are going to die. So try not to do that. And they shake hands on agreement, and through the handshake, he travels back to the future. And when he comes back to the future, he finds out that the little brother is all grown up, has survived the accident, and because he survived, he was able to save Takemichi from being hit by a train. Now in the future, he's become a police officer, and he's actually able to get some information on the gang. And the idea is that every time they shake hands, Takemichi is going to be time leaping. So the trigger is the handshake. And they're working together to save his girlfriend, basically. So now the rules with this, it seems as though only they retain the memories of the original timeline. It seems like the brother has his memories overwritten, but still remembers the original timeline. And Takemichi, he doesn't really get memories of the new timeline. Or if he does, they're very, like, faint. So he has to have other people cue him in on, okay, what's going on? What changed? So because this is activated by a handshake and he's working with the brother, you'd think that they'd have more interaction with each other, but you don't really get that many scenes of them interacting with each other. Even in the future, it's kind of like strictly business type relationship. Like he does a little bit of research for him. Now that I think about it, it doesn't seem like the brother character, even in the future, is really a police officer. It seems more like he's a private investigator because there's never really police to back him up when he needs it. So one of the main things that he changes is that he actually ends up being friends with the leader of the Toman gang. And this leader guy, Mikey, the main thing that causes his girlfriend to die is the fact that Mikey will turn evil one day. And there are a lot of events that could possibly, potentially set him off. Now, as you can imagine, this manga series has multiple arcs. So there are different events where he has to keep going back in time, changing the event so that this doesn't happen and it doesn't lead to his girlfriend's death. They have a couple fake outs where they're like, oh, this is the good timeline, but then it isn't. You would think that that would get old after a while. And, you know, I'm sure the writer also was afraid of that getting old after a while, but I think he actually does a good job of keeping the audience on the hook for this, because they do have a couple of interesting twists in there, and I mean, I'm fully updated, so clearly it didn't get old for me. So the main meat of the series is seeing this gang get into fights with other gangs. Takemichi is kind of like your typical shonen character. Their main superpower is just their sheer determination. That's a very shonen thing, right? You will power through a situation even if you're literally on the brink of death. So that's kind of the change we see in him. It's like a little character arc. For most of his life, just been used to apologizing, taking the easy way out, and now he has to push back because his girlfriend's life is on the line here. And I do like seeing that character change in him. It feels very satisfying. Granted, they do make you work for seeing that scene, but when we get there, it's very satisfying. He's also the crybaby trope-ish. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but basically just a very emotional character who likes to cry a lot. The best example I can give you of that trope is probably Izuku from My Hero Academia. I imagine that literally everyone has read that manga before, right? But I would argue that they do the crybaby trope much better with Takemichi than they do with Izuku. Like, Takemichi doesn't make me want to scream. He cries a lot, but it's usually not very annoying. And they go about this a pretty different way because he doesn't actually... Yeah, I don't think he actually wins any fights in this whole manga. It's more so just like he holds out in a fight, because the thing about his character is he's not supposed to be smart. Like, he doesn't go about anything the smart way, which can also be very frustrating because you think, oh, he's a time traveler. He's gonna use his intelligence to change these scenes. No, he just like literally shows up at the events. But yeah, he's not smart, he's not strong, he's not charming, he can't change people's minds. His main superpower is just his sheer determination and compassion. And with that, that's how he changes the future. Now, with time travel, there are a few wonky things. You might be asking, does it make sense? You might have to suspend that disbelief a little bit. I think the funniest thing about the fights and everything, all the crazy shit that goes down in this manga series, is the fact that cops feel like a myth. In this series. Like, they're a plot device, basically. They only show up when the writer needs them to show up. They never arrest the main characters, even when, like, the main characters take people to the hospital all the time with injuries that obviously came from a fight, and nobody investigates them. They don't ask questions. They're just... That's okay. But I don't have as much of a problem with that. I can understand why you would write it to be that way. Obviously, if you're gonna have these big gang fights, police are gonna get in the way of your main story here. I think one of the actual biggest problems of this manga series is just the villains. Now, sometimes the villains are fine, but this story kind of approaches this in a very superhero comic type way where it's like, killing is evil no matter what. You know, real men fight with their fists, they don't bring weapons to a fight. And I can respect that, don't get me wrong, I totally respect that. But the weird thing is they try to make every villain sympathetic in some way or another, and sometimes it just doesn't work for me. You know, sometimes they try to redeem a villain and it just doesn't make much sense why they would forgive them. And sometimes the motivations just don't really make a lot of sense. But it's only sometimes. Some of the villains are fine. They feel like they haven't had a lot of thought put into them. And granted, you know, it happens a lot when these mangakas make a first volume of something and they don't expect it to do as well as it does, so they try to like stretch out the story for longer than they originally wanted it to be, and then they gotta just randomly make up these new villains and they rush through it, and that's kind of what it feels like. It feels like you rushed through some of the villains. You know, another critique I have is that I do love the girlfriend character, and I feel bad that she doesn't have more of a major part in the story. She's more like the happy motivator in the background. You know, there's always the characters that motivate the main character. That's who she is. She's the motivator. And the scenes where she is in the manga, they're really good. They're really good scenes, but they're not the main portion of the manga. Like, there's no mid-chapters where they're going on a date together or anything like that. The closest thing you get is with the festival. For the most part, though, they're kind of distant because the main story wants to focus on these gang fights and they wants to focus on the characters in the gang, which is fine, I like her. I guess in a way, some people might find that as a relief that there's no real dating scenes in the manga because he is like 20-something in a 13-year-old body here. So what do I think of this series as a whole? I think it's pretty decent. I like the main character and I like his girlfriend, and I want to see the main character succeed, and that's why you get hooked into the series. Villains, they could use some work here and there. There's definitely a lot of nonsense, but overall, I think that it's probably worth the read. So if you are watching the anime, if you want to be fully caught up, I'd recommend go ahead, blast through the manga series. It does look like it's going to be ending soon. It looks like we're on the last arc, and I'd be curious to see how they wrap this up. But those are just some of my thoughts on Tokyo Revengers. Do you have your own opinion on the series? Maybe something that I didn't mention that you want to bring up, something that you like about it. How are you liking the anime so far? And if you did enjoy my review, remember to like the video, subscribe if you'd like to see more reviews or just more videos from little old me, and I'll see you guys next time. Till then, bye!
Program restart.